Hi guys, I decided to put all of my 1975 videos into one big video for you guys in case you wanted to watch it all at once. I really have no intro aside from that, so this is just gonna be that.
So last week when I was making my Taylor and Maddie video, I could not stop thinking about the 1975. And so I was like, okay, cool. Let me make a video talking about the 1975. And I kept writing and writing and writing. And eventually the script was 40,000 words long. So don't worry, this video is not going to be like an hour long. I decided I'm going to break it up into albums, talking about each of the albums. So this one is going to cover the EPs and their self-titled album, going all the way up until like 2014, 2015-ish. The next video is going to be talking about I Like It When You Sleep. The next video after that is going to be a brief inquiry and then notes and then being funny in a foreign language. That is the plan for the rest of the month, just to keep you guys informed. The 1975 is probably like my favorite artist of all time, my favorite band of all time. I love them to death. Clearly I could talk at least 40,000 words about them. So here we now are talking about them. Like I said, this is only going to cover the first like decade of their music, going from like when the band formed up until 2015. And then after that, each video is going to be based off each album. So it's going to be about like 3-ish years of their work at a time. If you have no idea who I am, hello, I'm Headphone Emoji. This is my channel where I talk about music and music related things. I talk about artists, albums, and everything in between. Sometimes I talk to artists about their albums. So if that is something you are at all interested in, perhaps you should like and subscribe and hit that bell maybe. This video, of course, is going to be covering the 1975. I've really been on my like Tumblr rock kick lately, as you can tell, but I talk about like every genre imaginable. So if that at all interests you, I implore you to please stick around. So the 1975, who the heck are they? If you don't know, that's okay. That's what this video is for. This is a full introduction into their music so that you too can become a fan in the 1975. The band is comprised of 4 members: Matty Healy, who's the frontman, Adam Han, who's the guitarist, Ross McDonald, their bassist, and then George Daniel, who is their drummer. Before they became one of the defining pop bands of the 2010s, they were low-key just school friends. The band themselves are from Manchester, England, and they first met as high schoolers, teenagers, just regular guys doing regular guy things. At the beginning of their career, if you could even call it that at the time, it was about 2002-ish. In a 2013 interview with Some Kind of Awesome, Maddie talks about how he remembers Adam came up to them and said, hey, do you want to play at one of these like gigs that this person is hosting? And they just started off doing covers of punk songs and pop songs. To them at this point especially, music was just kind of something that they did like after school, you know, it's just kind of like blowing off steam and all of that. Eventually they did end up writing a song. Maddie was like, hey, this is way better than work or school. And at the age of 15, they were like doing a music thing like guys do. The original lineup of the band is nearly unrecognizable than it is today. In fact, Maddie was their lead drummer at the time, if you could believe it. But Adam invited him to join the group. They were doing punk covers at local venues. Their original singer left the band and they were like, hey Maddie, we're gonna need you to come up here. Which then later George was recruited to replace him as the drummer, which is now the lineup that we know today. Although their early music was a sort of pop punk blend, the sounds that make up what we think of when we hear the 1975 today actually comes from much older influences. Maddie grew up surrounded by music. His dad is an actor and, you know, they know a lot of musicians. So naturally he was exposed to a lot of different kinds of music, especially from like the 80s and 90s. Like he says again in that same interview, he was kicking it with the Dire Straits. So at the age of like 13 and 14 now, Maddie knows a lot of music. Their band is less inspired by certain artists more than they are certain genres. They said that they were influenced by R&B and soul music a lot. While his dad was into the Stones and Otis Redding, his mom was into artists like Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. These influences continued on into their actual music today, with a strong definition of R&B music tied in with a lot of their alternative side, and later on a lot more electronic production. Maddie later went on on to describe their music as experimental, going from this glitchy R&B to 80s power pop, but it's all kind of done in like the 1975 way. And once again, the 1975, they've gone through a million names. Before they were the 1975, they were Talk Cows, they were the Slow Down, they were Big Sleep, they were Drive Like I Do. But despite all of these name changes, it was always just the four of them, which is what mattered more. Before officially releasing music, they were working on a lot of stuff privately before they actually started to get stuff out there. In many ways, they were like experimenting during this time, kind of honing in on what they wanted their sound to be, which still, if you listen to like 2010s 1975 and 2020's 1975, two very different sounds. So they've always been evolving. When talking to Interview Mag, he says that they never really wanted to release music. They didn't really feel a need to. They intentionally didn't release anything when they were really young. I guess because they had a lot of foresight. By the time that they eventually introduced themselves to the world as the 1975, they had spent nearly a decade kind of digging around and more developing their chemistry as a band and figuring out what directions they wanted to go in and how they work best together, how they work well together live, because you could argue that that is much more important than actually making music together, is the chemistry that you and your band have. But how the freak did they become the 1975? Many have asked this question, but there is an answer, don't worry. Matty met someone while he was on vacation. They handed him a book with a lot of annotations, and it was kind of like a diary. And out of all of the crazy scribbles that were in the book, something that stood out to him was just the date that said 1st of June 1975, and it just felt appropriate. The 1st of June is quite an important day within 1975 fandom lore, and just like lore in general. They tend to do something most years on the 1st of June. They didn't do anything this year. That's okay, I guess. The phrase itself, 1st of June 1975, is quite nostalgic, a little bit artistic, very, ooh, I wonder why they did that sort of vibes. It doesn't have any real meaning aside from just it sounded cool. The 1975 reflects on their band identity a lot. The fascination that they kind of have with preserving memories, romantic youth, and having a strong relationship with the past and present. But let's talk about how they actually started releasing music. By the early 2010s, they had already been working together for around a decade. Though they didn't have any public recognition at this point, their history was something that was quite rare for the 2010s at this point. As a band, they had an extremely established musical language before they even really had a song out. Though the band had gone through many different names, each name that they went through had a different representation of their stage of development. By the time that they were the 1975, they had already gone through 80s pop production, R&B production, soul music, electronic music, alt rock, synth pop, post-punk. They've done every kind of genre you could imagine. Their ability to blend these genres together so seamlessly has become one of their most defining characteristics today. But they officially started going by the 1975 in 2012. It was around this time that they signed with the independent label Dirty Hit, and they began an actual release campaign for their music. Before fans or any listener in general knew who the members were or who the 1975 was, they were kind of like releasing snippets like into the ether with very mysterious vibes going on, and this mysterious vibe was very appealing to a lot of people. Their early strategy was not around exposure or anything immediate. They wanted to slowly introduce themselves through recordings, performances, and word of mouth. They were kind of an if you know you know kind of artist. Their first official show was a month later in February of 2012, but this was only the beginning for the 1975, because only after here is their rapid growth. On August 6th of 2012, they came out with their first actual EP, Face Down. It has 4 songs: Face Down, The City, Antichrist, and Woman. This was one of 4 EPs that would lead up to their debut album. At this point, each song came with a video all directed by James Booth, and the visuals established a very early version of what would become a very recognizable aesthetic of both the early 2010s as a whole and the 1975's debut album. It was black and white, it was emotionally distant, it was minimalist, and it was intimate. while also being mysterious. Their lead single, The City, was the band's first major breakthrough, being already played on UK radio. The song introduced listeners to the 1975's combination of this sort of atmospheric guitar as well as their electronic texture, Maddie's distinct vocals, his accents, and their emotionally charged lyrics. It was as if the Talking Heads met M83. And this is exactly what set the 1975 apart from other bands. They were not an indie rock group, they were pulling from multiple different decades of pop and experimentation. It was clear that the band's knowledge of music and their love for music just shone through everything that they made. Their next EP, Sex, comes out in November 19th of 2012. This EP included Intro Set 3, Undo, Sex, and You. The title track again became one of those early establishing songs of the band's sound and identity. The song itself, one of my favorite songs, is all about youth, desire, reckless relationships, just intimacy, what it's like to be a teenager. As the original song from the EP gained a lot of attention online, it does end up on their debut album, as do a lot of their EP songs. Zane Lowe even called it the hottest record in the world, so if that means anything to you. The band at the time and their audience was growing quickly at this point, and it's only 2012. We still have 10 more years ahead of us. Their success wasn't because of individual songs. They had created an entire atmosphere around their music, which is something that we'll see throughout each album. They have a very distinct sound and feeling. They create soundscapes in the same way that other artists have like lore and world building with characters. They do the same thing, but you are the character, as well as their black and white visuals for this aesthetic and their like very mysterious identity that they had going on at the time. It connected strongly with young listeners and these people who were mainly on Tumblr because they were like, oh my gosh, this is so indie sleaze, you know what I mean? And one of the most sort of like important parts to their identity at this time was that they were extremely DIY. A lot of their early EPs were recorded like in their bedroom on their laptop kind of vibe. Maddie, again, in that same interview, he talks a lot in that interview. He talks about how producing their own music allowed them to preserve their identity as artists. If you can produce your own records, then you've lived it and you've understood it. Maddie and George still produce like all of the music that they make today. 2013 is really where they have their breakthrough moment with their third EP, Music for Cars. Their EP track list is Anna Brain, Chocolate, HNSCC, Head Cars Bending, and Me. Chocolate is like the 1975 song. With a catchy guitar and no one ever being able to understand the lyrics, it really is like that girl. And still there is one more EP we have to talk about, which is Ivy, which also came out in May 20th of 2013. Ivy, of course, being 4 in Roman numerals. The track list for this being The City, Haunt Bed, So Far It's Alright, and Falling For You. Falling For You. There is like 2 1975 songs that I can never listen to on my own, and one of those is Falling For You. When he talked to Interview Mag about this album, Maddie said that he has an obsession with love, drugs, and the balance between the two, the consequential dynamic of trying to have a relationship because of it, which is a lot of what this EP and later on most of their music is about. The EP continues to explore these themes of romance and addiction and how the two intertwine in almost toxic relationships. Falling For You being one of those more softer and intimate songs from the band that is now a staple in their albums. There will be like 1 or 2 songs like that, but this was like the first one of those. But what the heck? It's 2013, they have 4 EPs now and they're blowing up big time. Their rise seemed to happen all within the span of a year, similar to how we see a lot of artists now blow up out of nowhere, as the band had spent years playing small venues with no one knowing them, experimenting their sound and kind of just doing whatever they wanted to. Now they're on national radio and their concerts are getting bigger, their name is everywhere, but it wasn't exactly overnight. It was all of the years that they had in the past behind them of perfecting their chemistry and their sound to be what it was once they were finally public. So even though I just explained everything in like 5 minutes of how they went from nothing to everything, it did take a lot of years of hard work behind the scenes. And by 2013, they were now one of the most talked about brands in all of the UK. Ahead of releasing the 1975 by the 1975, they focused very heavily on touring. As a band, playing live is a major part of their identity. They do tours for all of their albums. It's extremely important to them. I mean, like, they had gone from playing like small shows in England to doing South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. And then immediately right after that, they were opening for a two-door cinema club back in Europe. So they were on like an insane run. As their momentum continued to build, they were opening for some of the biggest artists in the world. They opened for Muse, they opened for the Rolling Stones, they opened for The Neighborhood on the entirety of their US tour. As they continued to play bigger and bigger stages and doing bigger and bigger tours, their audience continued to grow almost exponentially. In 2013, they also performed at Reading and Leeds Festival, which is like a big thing. Like, that's insane. But there was something kind of crazy that happened when they were opening for The Neighborhood. Now, the 1975 and The Neighborhood, especially in 2013, this is like peak Tumblr nation over here. When he talked to Interview Mag about like what that experience was like opening for another like similar artist, he was like, we toured in America back in March and it was so fun, can't wait to get back there. There were a lot of similarities between the two bands, so it feels almost like extremely natural for them to be touring together. They were fans of each other, their fans are fans of both of them. It just made sense, especially with the black and white aesthetic being very important to both of them at the time. It heavily shaped the 2010 sort of like, I keep on saying Tumblr, but like Tumblr vibe of it all. As they were touring and releasing the EPs, they were also preparing for their debut full-length album that was about to come out, the 1975. The album was essentially years in development, going through many iterations. They even worked with producer Mike Crossey, who's worked with the Arctic Monkeys. Again, very Tumblr-esque. The album is produced by him as well as Maddie and George. He explains that doing an album requires a different approach than making an EP. To him, the best albums are the ones where every track could be a single. Or essentially what he's saying is every song needs to be a hit. While their EP is all centered around singular tracks, they want the album to feel like hit after hit after hit. And so now we're ready to release the album. But what genre do we put it under? That's a great question, because it could be electropop, indie pop, pop rock, emo, pop punk, funk, or indie rock. The album itself, again, has these distorted guitars that we've heard from them before. It has these synths, it has R&B, it has electro production, it's emotional. Like, the 1975 really is that band because they can do absolutely anything that you tell them to. The album itself, self-titled, sounds so nostalgic yet so futuristic. I mean, there are artists who still pull inspiration from that album today, 10 years later, almost 15. The influences that the band itself named were Michael Jackson, Peter Gabriel, Talking Heads, Roberta Flack, Boyz II Men, and TLC. So honestly, I understand why they couldn't pick a genre for this album because it really sounds like a mix of everything. But now, the date is September 2nd, 2013. We are ready to finally release the 1970 freaking 5. The original track list has 16 songs on it. The deluxe track list is basically another album in and of itself where it has another like almost 16 songs, I think. The album immediately connected with listeners. Within the first week, it sold 30,000 copies, and the band had officially gone from being this mysterious Manchester group to literally some of the most famous people in all of Britain. But why did the album connect so much with people? The 1975 is not just a band. They really are a pillar of the culture. Talking again about Tumblr and the real impact that they had on that website, the early 2010s landscape as a whole became a big part of the band's identity. Again, going back to those black and white visuals that they had along with these angsty lyrics and teenage uncertainty. You're just talking about a teenage girl at that point. And who lives and breathes on Tumblr? Teenage girls. Songs like Chocolate and Robbers are just so heavily intertwined with that time of just like, when you think of 2013, like it did sound like Chocolate and Robbers. There's a like rebellious nature that their music brings, where the aesthetic and like their music videos, it is just so like Tumblr at its prime. The album as a whole is just so closely tied to the emotional language of a generation of girls who are now like 20 something. By the time that they dropped their debut album, it became very clear that the band had created something beyond themselves, and they really were becoming a pioneer of their own sound. While the album is not at all universal, it is genre hopping, it is emotional at times, it's very stylized. Some people called it overly polished, some people people said it was too poppy, while other people saw them as contemporary and something breaking out of the norm. It went from being atmospheric to distorted to groovy to nostalgic, all within the same set of 15 songs, 16 songs. Again, their unpredictability is a major part of the brand's identity. I keep on saying brand, I mean band. Band's identity. As for critical reception of the album, it did okay. I think if a lot of people looked back at it now and looked at the cultural impact that the album had, they would probably rate it a bit higher. A lot of people just said it was like very popish, I guess. A lot of people would dismiss the band and this first album as something being just the newest craze, but the 1975 once again had something to prove that they were very much here to stay. Though their mainstream breakthrough seemed very sudden, their success is again built on years of work that nobody saw really. They're not an overnight success in the slightest. And I think that's what allowed their first album to be as good as it was, because they had worked so much behind the scenes. They were already backed by a label. They already had some sort of like cult following. So when it was time for them to finally go off into the real world, they really went in with a splash. And one of the strongest themes of the 1975's debut album, The 1975, is the very 80s reminiscent sound that they have. People tend to compare their production to 80s pop music quite a lot. And I think a lot of that comes from the music that Maddie was inspired by or listened to a lot when he was younger. In a review, someone states that a debut album with 16 tracks should never be able to capture and hold a listener's attention, but the 1975 makes a damn good stab at it. With a record littered with pop hits and imagination, MJ would be proud. MJ as in Michael freaking Jackson. The band themselves used 80s sort of like pop reminiscent sound as a foundation for a lot of their work, so of course it makes sense, but they're not exactly copying that sound, which is an important distinction to make. The band themselves sounds like nothing anyone else has ever heard. I mean, like, genuinely listen to a 1975 song and tell me, oh, this kind of sounds like some other song or artist. You can't, but what you can do is listen to another song and be like, oh, this sounds like Chocolate by 1975, or oh, this sounds like Sex by 1975, or oh, this sounds like Girls by 1975. That's their freaking impact. They're not an indie band, they're not a pop band, they're the 1970 freaking I get very defensive over them. But aside from their actual sonic identity, their visual identity is extremely strong. The black and white nostalgic minimalist vibe that they had going on, they kept it going for all of their EPs and their debut album. And that was what made them extremely recognizable. The imagery itself from the Robbers music video, Chocolate music video, it's so iconic and so 2013. Like, there's truly nothing like it. Everyone references them. They are the blueprint. A Bonnie and Clyde type song about dangerous love and emotional intensity and obsessions. Like, who doesn't love that? The visuals, the scenery, the like dark romanticized filter on life that the song has. It's very soft grunge, very 2013. It's no wonder people loved it. The song is like more than a track by the 1975. The song itself is so representative of what it was like to be alive in 2013 in online spaces. And that is something that 1975 does perfectly, is because they are some of the people who are literally making culture whether they want to or not. When you think about certain time periods, especially in like online aesthetic, you will always see them on the mood boards. And obviously the album was a commercial success. As we said earlier, it sold 30,000 copies. By 2018, it had sold 1 million. What had started off as a bedroom project of 4 boys who were teenagers turned into an international success over a decade of hard work. And that is why this era still matters today, even though it's been like over 10 years. Their impact on alternative music as it became more digital, on younger listeners as a whole, is like truly something to be studied. This is like an album that really was a right place at the right time kind of thing. And their legacy still holds up today. As now they have come out with 4 other albums. They're sitting on 2 more set to release soon, question mark. Their debut album is just full of contradictions. It is pop and alternative. It is modern and nostalgic. Is 2013 and 1975 at the same freaking time. And it was really just the start of what would be one of the greatest bands of ever. So we left off in our last video in 2013 after the release of self-titled debut 1975 by the 1975. We talked about the band, how they became to be, how they got their name, their 4 original EPs, and then their their album. It is 2014. They've done a couple tours. They've done a couple albums. They're on a bit of a hiatus, but not really. And honestly, no one could have predicted what was gonna happen after that. While the band had spent nearly a decade to become who they were today, things started moving a little bit too fast for them. After playing in teeny tiny venues in Manchester and then going on to open for some of the biggest bands in the world, while they were still defining their sound where they were not quite rock, not quite pop, not quite indie, they were really just a band full of contradictions. Before anyone had even known their name, the band was creating an identity for themselves and their sound. But then their self-titled was a massive success, #1 everywhere, and introducing them to audiences worldwide via Tumblr, YouTube, Twitter, you name it. And now suddenly, everybody is watching them, and everybody knows who 1975 is. But Maddie didn't think so. The success of this band, while it was exciting, it was overwhelming at times. The band had an identity, right? Black and white, moody, distorted, a little bit. Very late night, very grungy. But Maddie didn't want that. No. The 1975 has many different identities, many different visuals. Their debut was only a snapshot of what would really come to be the 1975. It was a part of who they were. In hindsight, it seems as though this album is a response to everything that people thought the 1975 were. It's what happens when an underground band gets shot into the mainstream. And how did they respond to this? They were not gonna play it safe. No, this is the 1975 we're talking about. They're gonna get even weirder. As Maddie said in a Dork interview from 2016, all of the songs that came on their first album were written in that time, and when it came out it was so successful, especially amongst the people who were young. And he was like, whoa, that's not all I have to say. The success of their debut forced the 1975 to confront something that they hadn't experienced before, the rest of the world. The 1975 as a band has always been about documenting life and what it was currently like, and suddenly the switch had flipped. Now people were documenting their life to the soundtrack of the 1975. After they finished touring for their previous album, they spent much of 2015 recording what would later go on to be I Like It When You Sleep. For now, I'm just gonna call the album Sleep because I'm not saying that whole thing. I'm just letting y'all know that now. Instead of continuing where they left off, they decided to challenge themselves a little bit more. They wanted to experiment and really see, do these fans like me or do they just like the 1975, the album? The album itself, 17 songs, 70 minutes long. A title so long, it was a conversation before any of the songs itself. On June 1st of 2015, June 1st again being one of those very important days in 1975 history, as we had mentioned in the previous video, on June 1st of 2015, the band deleted all their Twitter accounts. Scary, especially in the early 2010s. Twitter, big thing. Their website was gone, their social media was gone. Fans are speculating what the hell is going on. Did they break up? Did they go missing? What's going on? Their disappearance became one of the most talked about moments in their career. But worry not, the next day, Maddie's back. The band was returning, but they were returning a little bit differently. Instead of explaining anything, he posted the 1975-2. Their disappearance marked the beginning of their aesthetics changing. Before 2015, the 1975 was black and white. Their clothing, their album artwork, their videos, their photos, everything was black and white. But now, they went from black and white to white and pink. The cold, grungy minimalism of before was now neon. It felt a little buzzy. It felt a little warm. No one really knew what was going on, but it was gonna be fun, right? The band was announcing that their next chapter would not just be a new album, it is a completely different world for fans to immerse themselves into. The transformation is not just visual, it is sonic as well. Their new era took everything that the fans were enjoying from their previous work and embraced and built upon it. All the synth, all the funk, all the electronic music that they were into. They turned it all into something cinematic. It was as if you were entering an exhibit. Maddie explains that when he was younger, music was a portal, and he wants the 1975 to be that for his younger fans. This idea that music is a portal becomes a defining principle for this album as well as their subsequent releases. It's not just a collection of songs, it is an album in quotation marks. It is a very specific mood and moment in time. It's as if you were looking at a Rothko painting, but the painting is a neon sign and you are inside the album cover. Yes. After months and months and months of speculation of what the hell are they doing, the 1975 has confirmed that there would be an album. And on October 8th of 2015, we are introduced to the first single of the album. Love Me. This song immediately goes to show that this is not the same 1975 as we knew 2 years prior. The song is loud, the song is a little bit ridiculous, the music video is bright, it's pink, it's confident. They know who they are as a band, and they know that if their fans really rock with them, they will stay. The band in the video is intentionally playing with fame and celebrity culture. He's surrounded by cardboard cutouts of Harry Styles, Elvis Presley. This is kind of also where they start to get a little bit political with their music, which we'll definitely see in later albums, but they're kind of mocking this new sense of fame that they're in. It's a very funk-forward song about being scrutinized and fawned over as described in Pace magazine. And it's a perfect introduction into what this album would be and the entire philosophy behind the 1975 at the time. They wanted attention, but they wanted to criticize the culture that gave them attention. They wanted people to question what fame does to a person, especially to the person that they made famous. Everything about the 1975 has always been a contradiction, and this album plays on that even more than before. The world that was once black and white is now full of color, but this color is literally only pink. The aesthetics and visual identity of this band has always been part of their music. There are two things that are intertwined. This album is brighter and stranger and more ambitious than before. It is self-aware. The title of the album is intentionally excessive. I like it when you sleep, for you are so beautiful yet so unaware of it. It sounds pretentious. It sounds like a joke. And that's the point. The band knows that it's ridiculous. They embrace it, just as they embrace their newfound fame. Everything has become part of their performance of the 1975 the band. But now they have to build a whole new identity because they don't want to just be like the black and white band. Their new album is all about expression. Everything has become so much bigger. Their production budget, their instrumentation, their artwork, their performances, the themes that they want to speak about. Because now that they're under this sort of limelight, Matty knows that he has the opportunity to talk on things and criticize on things that he didn't really have a voice to do before because nobody was listening. The band has almost fully moved away from their indie rock sound, leaning much deeper into this wider musical palette that they have, especially more into this dance pop, synthy, jazzy sound, which again, very electronic. He loves his electronic music. The band cited artist influences as being D'Angelo, Christina Aguilera, Roberta Flack, Loveless by My Bloody Valentine, and Boards of Canada, among others. The combination of all of these influences can only result in something like Sleep. One song sounds like an 80s pop anthem, while another is an experimental piece, while another is a jazz ballad. Like, it only goes on. And somehow still all of these songs sound like they were the 1975. They don't sound like they're trying to be anyone else. The album itself though, while not just musical, it is a cinematic experience like Matty wanted it to be before. The vibes of it very much remind me of the Grand Budapest Hotel, which I don't know if that's what he was going for, but I have a feeling it was. The artwork of the actual album is created by Samuel Burgess Johnson and photographed by David Drake. It is a now iconic neon pink sign against a white background. Very simple, very minimal, very recognizable, and very intentional. The band wanted something that was similar to modern art, as they are now becoming modern art, and they wanted something that would exist outside of music. You can now still go and see the sign today, actually. For each song on the album, the band created a different pink neon sign. They were photographed in different locations, creating different images that would reflect the atmosphere of each track. The idea was that every song existed somewhere in our world. We just had to find what that place would be for us. Each song having a different memory, a different feeling attached to it. While the album sounded larger than life, the writing and the songs are deeply personal. To its bones, the album is about identity. It's about what happens when people suddenly start to see you and think that they know you, and you have to look inwards on yourself and wonder, who am I? The album constantly goes on to question fame, celebrity culture, addiction, insecurity, religion, politics, love, and loneliness, among other themes. And it's about what happens when someone is still trying to figure themselves out under a microscope that a million people are watching. As Maddie said while talking about the record, they wanted to make something really honest and uncompromising. This sort of freedom in making this album is defining to the record. It very much feels as like what would happen if you give an underground band an unlimited budget. They didn't want to be predictable. They didn't want to repeat the same formulas before. They wanted to see how else can they make a hit. Making a 17-track long album with multiple instrumental scores in them. Many moments where fans could click away at any moment and be like, hey, I'm not freaking with this. They trusted their listeners to fall follow them through the story. And that's really what the album is. It is a journey to go on. It opens with an alternate version of their song, The 1975, somewhat of a tradition for the band beginning each of their albums with a self-titled track. Rather than the darker atmosphere it was in their first album, it is now a choir? Question mark? A very new feeling that you would feel something new while listening to this album. And then the tone immediately shifts going into Love Me. There's a dramatic fade into the song, and it is like an explosion of neon color in your face, or in your ears technically. The song is so like theatrically excessive. I love it so much. And like genuinely, I love this album so freaking much because it actually is hit after hit after hit, because the next song, Ugh, is holy moly. It continues with our themes of contradiction, where musically the sound is so bright and so catchy, while lyrically the song is about addiction, as many songs of the 1975 are, which we will talk about more later in another video talking more about his addiction. But this upbeat production contrasts greatly with the darker subject matter of the song, and they have this really interesting technique of making painful subjects sound beautiful yet not romanticized in their music. The next major single of this album is She's American. This song is about Halsey, yes. It follows his fascination and confusion of American culture. It's very bright, very energetic, but it comments on a lot of stereotypes. And again, this is like that album where we start to see them get a little bit more political, which we'll really see in future albums, how far he goes with it. But the song talks about a fantastic dream that he has about, I guess, American culture and how it's not exactly reality. Then we talk about everyone's fan favorite, Somebody Else. Unlike all the other singles, very loud, very poppy, this one is much more slowed down. Please don't text your ex while listening to the song. It is one of the band's biggest songs, and for good reason. It's again one of those defining songs of the era, capturing a universal feeling of watching someone become a stranger before your very eyes. But the album commercially did very well. It was #1 in the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, selling almost 100,000 copies in its first week. The band had taken their biggest risk of their career, and it paid off. Somehow this weird neon pink experiment that they had was their biggest success yet. The album's early singles helped create a new identity for them, combining the bright synth pop production with these harrowing lyrics, if I'm gonna be honest. Some listeners saw it as straightforward pop songs, not really listening to the lyrics, but underneath all of the neon lights, we see an album that is about belief and identity and loneliness in relationships, all while trying to understand a bit more of yourself. As we just mentioned, at this point in their career, this is the biggest risk that they've ever taken. And many critics struggled while trying to write about this album because it wasn't something to be consumed quickly. As one review has described it, unless you are a die-hard 1975 fan or have a really good attention span, it's unlikely you'll get through this album in one sitting. And that's exactly what Maddie wanted. It's not something to give single after single. This album was something to create a brand new world. As he said in his Dork interview, I really do live these records. For him, songwriting is a way to turn these ordinary moments of his life into something more cinematic. He remembers watching The Cable Guy and hearing Jim Carrey's character say, "The trouble with real life is there is no danger music." And he wants to add a sort of soundtrack to our lives as listeners. And that is exactly what this album came to be. It is the soundtrack of a generation, as every 1975 album is, at least for me personally as a fan. This album is all about excess, and it's all about more in general. More synths, more color, more brightness, but it's also about more in a bad sense, you know, more addictions, more uncertainty, more problems at the end of the day. It's about trying to understand yourself while constantly having to perform. One of the most unexpected songs on this album is If I Believe You. It is once again one of those songs that is more of a major shift in their songwriting in general. A song that very openly questions belief. It's a song about longing. It's not exactly about religion. And it's about wanting comfort or looking for comfort in places where there is none, and wondering if having belief would make life easier. These, of course, are feelings that I feel like everybody feels. The gospel vocals put over an electronic sound is a very interesting choice. I think that I really don't know what to think about it, actually. I don't know, but the theme of this song connects deeply with the album as a whole and the confusing feelings that this album brings up. And as the 1975 has grown as a band, Matty has expressly spoken about how he doesn't want to be a spokesperson for the people, but he is totally okay with talking about things that people don't necessarily want to talk about, but need to talk about. Fans weren't only connecting with the music, they were connecting with the ideas behind the music. The 1975 and the fan base behind them is a place where people could belong. And because of that, a lot of people look to Matty as some sort of voice of the generation, which we will get into in later albums, but he does not want to be that. He's often explained that, especially on this album, what he wants to do is use his platform to make people passionate and conscientious. A song has more power than a statement ever could. A song is catchy, a song is memorable, but it's these ideas that exist naturally in the art that he creates because they are part of his innate being. The heart of this album is about love. More than that, it's about loving someone. The album is all about acceptance and tolerance. Rather than sounding political, it sounds more like a personal conversation that you would have with a friend or someone a couple years older than you when you are struggling to figure out what life is all about. The album is all about creating community. I think a lyric that sums it up the best is in Paris, where he says, "Hey kids, we're all the same, what a shame." And we see that most at concerts, which is why live music has always been so important to the 1975. It is a place where everyone can kind of come together and really feel understood and feel seen. One of the biggest changes in this era, aside from their music, was the growth and diverseness of their fan base. The band has always had extremely passionate supporters, but now, especially with our mainstream success, it seems like everyone is a fan in 1975. I mean, that's basically when I became a fan, or became more of a conscious fan, where I would actively go out and search for their music to listen to. Before their mainstream success, they had a very intense connection with their fan base, mainly online, and as they grew more in the mainstream, it seemed as though their fan base was growing even more online, as they were racking up followers everywhere. And that connection that they had with their fans just continued to expand as their fan base did. As he's explained, there is a sort of cultish element to this band and their fan base, and it's something that happened very naturally. The band's audience grew because people feel represented by their music, people feel part of something that is bigger than themselves. And that is a theme that this album tackles so well, the idea of being an outsider. The reason that people connect so strongly with this band is because this band, the 1975, is okay with not being part of the norm. They're okay with being outsiders, and they're okay to say that. And it's their honesty which is the most appealing. The band's biggest message with this album is that we are all the same. We are all just confused people. The album makes people feel like they are not alone, and that it is okay to explore these feelings. As he further goes on to talk about touring and everything, he says that you realize it's not the differences that you notice, it's the consistencies. Consistencies between fans, noticing in what ways everyone is so similar to each other. Whether they were playing in Bangladesh or Alaska or London, these same type of people were showing up, these younger people who felt connected to their music. And it's the similarities that are so blindingly obvious, which later on went to become one of the bigger themes of both this album and future albums. While the internet has made the world feel smaller, we often forget how large the world really is and how many people there really are. This album has gone on to have one of the larger legacies within their discography. By the end of 2016, the band themselves had transformed almost completely. They were no longer this black and white Tumblr band. They were now the 1975 mainstream sensation. They had 2 #1 albums under their belt now, and both of their albums were part of something so much bigger than themselves. They were extremely culturally impactful. As he later reflects on in this Dork interview, he says that when you stop trying so hard, it kind of works. While the album again continues to be a contradiction of life, a colorful album about loneliness, a huge pop record about insecurity, it's these contradictions again that are why it connects so much with fans. By 2017, the band was living inside something that they had spent years upon years of trying to achieve. The scale of their past 2 albums and their touring success was nearly immeasurable and absolutely changing their careers in ways that nobody could comprehend. But the 1975 never forgot where they came from. They, to this day, even though they are such a big band, they very much do feel like a local indie band. These themes of friendship and nostalgia and identity are still so pertinent in their music, and it's that which is so important to the I Like It When You Sleep era that we talked about today. It's so important to speak about your lived experiences because you never know who it might impact, and you really never know who is going through probably the same situation that you're going through, because I'm pretty sure it's a lot. This neon aesthetic became a very real environment that many people felt was home. The colors, the visual, the stage design of their tour, it felt like stepping into an alternate world, one that you really only experience in your dreams when you're trying to run away. This sort of loneliness turned into connection when you were in the crowd. The isolation turned into community as we all shared these experiences together. The neon rectangle has become a symbol for 1975 for years now. The artificial brightness contrasting heavily with the emotional heaviness of a lot of their music. This aesthetic is nearly inseparable from the name of the 1975 today. While pink is a symbol of this album, I don't think that neon sign is ever going to dim. Okay, so we are continuing on from 2017. The 1975 is no longer just a promising young band from Manchester. They are a worldwide sensation. From the success of I Like It When You Sleep and the success of the 1975 debut album, the world now knows that they can do any genre, they can do anything. They could be moody, they could be colorful, they can be neon, they can be black and white. So what's next for them? Well, their success creates a challenge. Now the world has seen what they can do. Now the question is, what else can they do? Enter a brief inquiry into online relationships. As we mentioned in our previous video about how Sleep had become a bit more political, a bit comical in the way that they would mock current day fame. This album takes that up a couple notches. A defining characteristic about the 1975 is their way that they transform between eras and albums. Debut was all about nostalgia. It was all about romance. Sleep is all about insecurities and uncertainty. What do they have to talk about now? Rather than talking about themselves, they decided it's time to talk about the world around them. I think something that makes them such a good band is their ability to evolve with the world around them, and their ability to do that while still being recognizable as the 1975. They didn't just repeat the same formulas that shot them into stardom in the first place. They're capturing something much bigger than themselves at this point. They're capturing what it's like to exist in a modern world. And that's exactly what this album is. It's a piece about modern dependency. Despite the title, A Brief Inquiry into Online Relationships, it's not just about relationships in a romantic sense. It uses the internet as a metaphor for human dependency, the dependency that we have on others, the things that we turn towards when we are looking for a connection, whether that be technology, social media, fame, addiction, drugs, validation, attention of any kind. The internet is just one example of these things that we run to. The album itself presents a much broader question. Why do we become attached to the things that make us isolated? It's an exploration of the codependency that we have on things, whether that be drugs, sex, internet, the things that we use to temporarily numb ourselves from the realities of the modern world. The interpretation of this album is more important than any song that is on it. It connects us to the broader culture outside of just Maddie's experiences. At first glance, it's just another album that's talking about how phones are bad and that social media sucks and addiction is real. But at the end of the day, it's all a form of escape. It provides temporary comfort for us. It creates cycles of dependency. And as for lead singer Maddie Healy, the connection is not something theoretical. It is not a metaphor for something else. It is very personal and very real. During the tour cycle of their previous record, I Like It When You Sleep, Maddie was privately struggling with a heroin addiction, while the band's public image was becoming much more brighter and colorful and larger than life. He was facing something very very serious. Eventually after tour, he went to rehab, and his experience there is the foundation for this album. Rather than hiding from his struggles, he used them as the emotional centerpiece for a lot of the songs that we hear today. Now, this album is not about addiction alone. It is about the different ways that we try to escape from our lives. And again, this was a major shift for the 1975. Their earlier songs hid behind characters and raunchy humor or irony. But this album is probably one of the more, or even most, honest and exposed that they've ever been. It's very direct, while it still has a lot of that musical experimentation in it and weird concepts that we have grown to love with this band. It is much more outwardly emotional. He's no longer just writing about the idea of vulnerability, he is being vulnerable with his audience. And that's exactly what this album was. It was the beginning of a new phase of the 1975, essentially a more honest, unprotected from the glass behind the studio. And it's this honesty that becomes a very defining trait of the album. It came at a time where online identities were near inseparable from real life persona. Everyone was curating, everyone was performing. It's 2018. I mean, everyone is trying to be the best version of themselves, both on Instagram and in real life. The 1975 was interested in seeing what was happening underneath when you peel off the performance. The album asks us questions like, if we're constantly connected, why are we so alone? And if social media gives us a voice, why is communication so hard? From the political anger of songs like Love It If We Made It to the addictive narrative of It's Not Living If It's Not With You, and the loneliness explored in songs like Be My Mistake, this album covers it all. It once again painted the portrait of a very specific time period, a pre-COVID time period, but still just as online.
Well, you couldn't be more wrong, actually. I'm unbelievably sentimental.
It's very easy to notice how much this band has grown in the past 5 years with 3 back-to-back albums. Seeing how ready Matty was to be so open and vulnerable about his lived experiences, as he's always been with his music, but this time taking a much darker turn on it. I mean, like, as a fan, you can't help but to be proud of everything that they've gone through and everything that they've overcome. But as the world was introduced to this new era, this new album, we meet the first single, which is Give Yourself a Try. Now, Give Yourself a Try, while it is somewhat of a pop anthem, at least to me personally, it sounds nothing like anything on I Like It When You Sleep. It is sharper, but still stripped, and it's a lot more direct in terms of lyrics. You have to learn how to exist with yourself and the life you've made for yourself. And that is a core theme of this album. It's no longer just about a band exploring their identity. It's no longer about trying to be something they're not, trying to form an identity at all. It's about documenting an identity crisis in real time. This album truly is the soundtrack to an online world, or as online as the late 2010s had become. By this point, only 3 albums in, the band had reached a sort of success that other artists can only dream of and spend their whole lives chasing. They'd gone from being a misunderstood group of teenagers to the underdogs opening for larger artists. They've seen multiple waves of public perception wash over them, and it's finally time for them to really truly be their own confused self and grow up in the public eye. But with this kind of success comes new challenges, of course. What happens after you reinvent yourselves? How many times can you reinvent yourselves? What happens if you've already proved everyone wrong? Can you do it again? Can you do it again after that? They can't repeat themselves. That's becoming too predictable. So on November 30th of 2018, we meet their new record. It's not an evolution. It's just an attempt to document what the world is like today. The world that is so shaped by social media and technology and political instability and addiction and loneliness and an impending quarantine that nobody knew would happen, and a constant pressure to perform for the public. The title itself became the central question of the album. What happens to our relationships when we are constantly filtered through the internet? I think that the biggest misconception about the album is that it's about the internet and being online. I think that the internet is a metaphor for all forms of escapism. Like we said before, it doesn't just have to be the internet. It could be drugs. It could be validation, it could be entertainment, it could be relationships. I think it's just the idea of escapism that is the foundation for the record. A central question is, has technology brought us closer together or farther apart as people? And it's again this kind of contradiction that the 1975 loves to explore in their albums, whether that be a visual or theoretical contradiction. And like every album before, they start off with the song The 1975. Unlike previous versions of the song though, this one represents a new kind of uncertainty, whereas before it meant introduction or rebirth. Rather than Maddie's voice, or anyone's voice really, this song is built around a computer-generated voice. Yes, I know that AI is controversial these days, but it was 2018 and they were making a piece of commentary about technology. Leave them alone, please. The result of the song is very futuristic and very unsettling, I'll say. And it establishes one of the biggest themes of this album, which is the boundary between human and artificial life. It starts off the album feeling very cold, almost science fiction-y, and it brings up again the question of who is in control, us or the technology. We then move into Give Yourself a Try with the harsh guitars and honestly minimal production. I love it like so much. It's so good. Instead of trying to impress their listeners with something complex and sonically excessive, it's just direct and to the point, and they just want to get their words out there. It's what I think is probably the closest to their earlier genres of music, in the sense that it is kind of punk rocky and it is like so catchy. I think that this piece that the song plays in the story of the album is that it is a bridge between the past of the band and the future of what this album will be. And then we are brought into the second single, It's Not Living If It's Not With You. One of the most important developments within this album is the confrontation of addiction. After years of substance abuse and finally getting much needed help, the experience dramatically changed both his life and his songwriting. And instead of hiding that period away and not really talking about it, Maddie puts it all into this album and this song. He doesn't romanticize it, he doesn't glamorize it in any way. He just says it like it is. He focuses on the fears and the loneliness of it and the absolute repetition of an addiction. Musically, it's very bright. It's very, very 80s, like most of their inspiration. It sounds as if the guitars sparkle. Like it's a good song, it's a catchy song. It shows how someone can appear completely functional while battling a severe addiction. Living without the thing that you've grown so dependent to can feel near impossible, but continuing to depend on it can be just as detrimental, if not worse. And I think that that is the main message of the song. Please tell me if I got it wrong. I don't know. Two Time is the next single that we're going to be talking about. And it talks about love in a digital age. Now, honestly, this is, again, I'm gonna say all of these songs are my favorite songs. This is like one of my favorite albums like ever. Not as good as Notes, but it's okay, I guess. This one has more bangers, I'll say. On the surface, it's a very simple pop song, and I love the music video for it. Like, I watch that music video weekly. But the song is about cheating. I'm just gonna say that outright. Like, the repeated phrase in the chorus feels obsessive in a way. It reflects on a world where communication is constant, but intimacy is extremely complicated. Relationships, what used to be seeing someone every couple days, turned into constant surveillance over text messages, social media, dating apps. The internet creates endless opportunities for connection as well as endless opportunities for betrayal. The main question that this song asks is, if we're all being recorded, why do we still repeat the same mistakes? Which is a pretty valid question to ask. It's a good question, Maddie. Technology gives us so much access to other people, access that we probably shouldn't have. And access doesn't equal understanding. I know we've talked about a lot of songs, but you can't talk about this album without talking about Love It If You Made It. And honestly, I could make a whole video itself about the political implications of songs like Love It If We Made It. It's probably the most defining song on this album. It is both an emotional and political centerpiece, establishing that the 1975 is no longer interested in being a pop band. They want to be a reflection of the world around them, and in this case, the late 2010s. It references police brutality, racism, political divisions, climate anxiety, celebrity culture, modern news cycles, and internet outrage, among many other topics. The lyrics genuinely feel like if you were to just scroll Twitter for 10 minutes. The most famous phrase of the song, "Modernity Has Failed Us," is a defining statement of the album and a lot of the message of the 1975 as a whole. This song doesn't end in hopelessness, and it's not about naive optimism either. It is about desperation, failure a little bit, acknowledging the world that you're in and that it's broken, trying what you can to improve it. It's an angry song, but it's not a cynical song, and I think that's what I love most about it. And I think that's what a lot of people resonated with as well, which is why I think it is low-key one of the most important songs, like, ever of all time. And I probably will make a separate video just talking about political implications of that song and why we need more like it. By the halfway point of the album, we've already very well established the central conflict of the narrative. Technology has changed how we communicate. It's changed how we love, fight, how we experience politics, how we experience the world around us. But there's a deeper question throughout all of this. What does it mean to be human? It's not a criticism of technology, it is a criticism on human behavior. And it recognizes that technology has become an extension of our behavior. The phone is an extension of our arm at this point. The internet reflects us back on ourselves. It amplifies the best and the worst parts of us. The second half of the album is less about the chaos of the outside world and more about the internal consequences of the world that we live in. The loneliness, insecurity, search for meaning, and ultimately our desire for something that's real. One of the strangest tracks is probably also one of the most important ones, "The Man Who Married a Robot" / love theme. It's not a traditional song. There is no Maddie Healy in it. There's no chorus. It's a track that is narrated by a computer generated voice telling the story of a man in love with a robot. He describes the internet as if it is a romantic partner, something that's always available, never judging him, with endless information. Sounds a little too close to what we're seeing a lot of people deal with today. This man has access to everything, yet he's still so lonely. It's almost a modern take on Radiohead's Fitter Happier. You could compare it to movies like Her or Companion or even Obsession now. Both this album and Radiohead's OK Computer question what technology has done to the human identity. And now this question has turned into what happens when technology has already become so integrated in our lives. The internet is part of our everyday existence. We really can't escape it, even if you try. And the tragedy of the song is that the internet isn't evil. The man's relationship with the internet is very genuine. It's very real. But his relationship is incomplete because there's no other being. This is where we meet Sincerity is Scary. The song is very unexpected on the record in the way that it sounds. It's very jazzy, it's very gospel. It feels so disconnected from the previous song, but it's extremely vulnerable. In an era where everyone is so wrapped up in their online image, being genuine and honest can feel really scary and a bit uncomfortable at times. We're often encouraged to perform versions of ourselves, versions to different people that we meet, creating endless identities of ourselves. This song argues that we have become afraid of being sincere because sincerity requires vulnerability. I think one of the most memorable lyrics to the song is, "Why can't we be friends when we're lovers?" reflecting his frustration with emotional distance. I mean, I'm gonna say it again, this is like one of my favorite songs. This album is like banger after banger after banger, I'm telling you. In a world that is so defined by arguments and division, the answer is not criticism. As the lyric goes, "Instead of calling me out, you should be pulling me in." The answer is empathy, something that very few people have these days. Going back to some of the more electronic songs, we have "I Like America" and "America Likes Me." Very auto-tuney. It's again another politically charged song similar to "Love It If We Made It," but very different. It talks about gun violence, youth anxiety, political frustration, and the relationship that young people have with them and their country. This song contrasts deeply with its sister Love It in the sense that it is very personal. It sounds like something that you listen with your headphones in while the world is moving so quickly around you. It's very chaotic, very processed. The choice to use such a heavy auto-tune is very intentional. It shows different layers of the band that we really have never accessed before and wouldn't be able to access without technology, capturing a very specific feeling amongst younger generations. I mean, we are inheriting problems we never tried to create, whether that be climate change, political issues, economic uncertainty. Is a song that captures the anxiety of it all. Another quiet moment in the album is Inside Your Mind, returning more to their traditional songwriting approach. After so much that we've heard, this song seems scarily simple. It's built around a very haunting guitar and very vulnerable vocals, a lot of V's. And it asks a scarily painful question of how well do you know another person? The question that I ask myself every day. Other people will have thoughts and fears and memories that you just can't access. Connecting back to the central theme of the album, that technology creates an illusion where we think we know everything about someone, but we really know nothing. You can see someone's photos, you can see someone's location, you can see their messages, you can see their search history, but one thing you cannot see is directly inside their mind. And again, probably one of the most devastating songs on the album is Be My Mistake. I previously said that there were 2 songs that I can't listen to by 1975. I lied, there's 3 songs. And this is one of them. It is the most stripped back song on the album, possibly one of the most stripped back songs by them. It focuses on infidelity and the guilt behind it and the struggle behind the rock star lifestyle. But hey, he's admitting his mistakes. He's acknowledging his flaws, and that's good for something, isn't it? One of my favorite songs live is I Always Wanna Die. This song is slow, almost cautious before it crescendos into something dramatic, as always. One of my favorite lyrics ever by them is, if you can't survive, just try. There's no grand solution to life. There's not one thing that'll figure everything else out. You can't pretend everything is suddenly gonna get better, but you can at least try. I think this track really is a career defining moment in the band's discography. It's almost as if looking in a mirror, really seeing yourself for the first time. Sonically, it brings together everything that they've worked for the past who knows how many years. It has the emotional drama of Robbers. It has the atmosphere of I Like It When You Sleep and the vulnerability of A Brief Inquiry. It is the perfect song, and it is the perfect album closer as well. When this album released, people were divided, understandably so. Some people called it a masterpiece, some people found it quite overwhelming. And I think it's part of that division that makes this album so significant today. They created something too large to be fully understood, something I don't know if they even fully understand. And that may be the greatest achievement that this album has ever had. They created a record that is about politics, AI, addiction, loneliness, and the internet. But most of all, the album is about human desire. It's about connecting. It's about relationships, how they fall, how you can create new ones, how they are never truly what you think they are. The album argues that the problems we experience online aren't about technology. They didn't make this album to prove themselves. There was nothing left to really prove. The world already knew what they could do. They're the 1975. It's a commentary on internet culture and somewhat of a multimedia art project. While it showcased what they can do musically, it also talks about what they like to talk about politically, because the 1975 is a band that does not fit in 1 or 2 categories. Their music has contained elements of alt-rock, synth-pop, R&B, electronic music, 80s pop, funk, jazz, ambient music, gospel, house music, experimental pop, and so many more genres. But with Inquiry, this unpredictability is even more extreme. There's punk songs like Give Yourself a Try, there's electronic songs like How to Draw, R&B songs, jazz and gospel on Sincerity, rock on I Always Wanna Die. There's everything because they can't be contained. The difference is they make all of this sound like it's the 1975. Since 2018, the issues that they talked about in this album have only grown tenfold. The world truly needs another Inquiry. In general, this album captures the feeling of what it was like to live back then. And listening to it now just shows how much worse it's gotten. A lot of the anxiety that this album talks about stems from the fact that modernity provides us endless access via the internet. We are constantly aware of suffering and tragedy, and because of that, we've become numb to it. Now, the young generation has to deal with personal problems as well as global problems. Our personal identities are shaped by these global issues. The 1975 has constantly been a band that represents a generation, our generation. While critics have argued that this album captures the experience of being young in the late 2010s, I will argue that that is what the 1975 has always been about. I would say they are a defining band. They are not the defining band, but I think they've done a great job in capturing what it feels like to live on Earth. Matter of fact, we should send a vinyl up to the aliens of all of their albums. The 1975 has taken so many genres and turned it into their own, put them in a blender and called it theirs. They have talked about so many political issues, snapshotting the cultural zeitgeist and putting it into an album. Each of their albums is somewhat of a time capsule of when it's released and the political contentions around it. I think that this album greatly changed people's expectations around the 1975. They're not just a sonically exceptional band anymore. They are now a politically exceptional band in their bravery to express messages. If they wanted to, they can make a great pop song. If they wanted to, they can make a great punk song. They can experiment without losing their identity. There are so many directions in which they can go, which we will see in their next two albums. As for my final thought, this is such an all-timer of an album. It genuinely is like hit after hit. It's an album that's resonated with me very deeply because I think when I listened to it, it was the first time that I ever really like saw this band as like, oh wow, I can actually relate to what they're saying because I've come to an age where I'm like, you know, able to comprehend the words that I'm hearing, as well as being able to relate it to so many lived experiences. While it's an album about escaping loneliness, I think of all of the ways that technology has changed my own behavior. I mean, hell, I'm talking to a camera right now. So the main message that I've got from it is, despite what the world is looking like right now, you have to keep trying. You have to keep going and you have to survive to see change happen. And you have to be a part of that change. And throughout everything, you have to love despite it all, which has always been a motto for me. I've always chosen to love despite it all. So as a brief inquiry into online relationships has resonated for nearly a decade now, I don't think it'll stop. I think it will continue to be a soundtrack of the generation. So we are continuing on with this series. If you haven't seen the first couple of videos, they're not super important, but it would be cool if you watch them. It would give you a bit more background, but if you just want to hear me talk about this album, that is okay too. Guys, I'm battling like the worst allergies of all time. If I sound like nasally or sniffly, I'm so sorry. We're gonna continue on from 2018, which is when Inquiry had released. By this point, the 1975 had reached a height of their career that many other bands simply aspire to, and there are only 3 albums in. But they had gone from being like completely dismissed off as a band and nobody really like believed in them, where people kind of thought that they were like a teensy bit of like an industry plant because they seemed like they had a little too much structure from their debut, if that makes sense. Like they had a full-blown aesthetic going on. They had already a bit of a cult fan base. Like it was a little bit sketch, but it's just because they were good at what they do. And now in 2018, they are one of the more culturally significant and like very ambitious bands of like modern alt music. How cool is that? Their third album, Inquiry, had released at the tail end of 2018, really. It talked about addiction, loneliness, political instability, all stuff that they had been building towards with their other 2 albums, kind of ramping up the themes more and more with each release. And they did not stop doing that when it came to notes. They started writing it while they were on tour for Inquiry, on the Music for Cars tour. They had these really politically charged songs such as Love It If We Made It. They were no longer really writing songs about relationships relationships. They were writing songs about the world, what it's like to be a young person in the world, and they really wanted to make a change in the world with their music. Not to say that they weren't doing that before, trying to do that before, but they were trying to do it on a more grander scale, knowing the audience that they had. Most of their songs were about culture, right? They were talking about the things that young people have to deal with. They talked about addiction, like we said before. They talked about this sort of internet loneliness. How are we so connected to people yet we don't know anything about them? Because each of their releases had been ramping up more and more politically each time, they were expected to have something to say with this next release. And while they were creating it, it was like literally right after they had created A Brief Inquiry. So they were basically sister albums in the sense that they were kind of meant to be together, but they realized that they were talking kind of about separate things, and also that it would be way too long if they did one album. But so that's why it's called like Music for Cars era, which is basically everything like 2016 up until 2021-ish, naming the era after their 2013 EP that we talked about all the way back in our first video. Both of these records are part of like a larger artistic statement about life and modern life at the time, which was like the late 2010s. While Inquiry talked about technology and the internet and more psychological aspects of what happened to people, Notes looks more inward, talking about like nostalgia, personal identity, going back and again talking about like climate change and political frustration that we kind of mentioned a little bit before, and like living in a very unstable world. They are two albums that are connected but very opposite to each other, as Inquiry talks about the world that existed and Notes looks at the world that will become, kind of looking at the present and the future. Now, as we've talked before though, Maddie Healy does not want to be the voice of the generation. As they continue to talk about politics, people tend to put them on a pedestal saying, why is this white guy talking about politics? And he is the first person to say that he knows that he is pretentious. Being self-aware does not prevent you from criticism. For some people, it seems as though he represents the anxieties of the generation. He openly discusses addiction and depression and politics and young uncertainty. Whereas for other people, this is just a wealthy, successful white man cosplaying as someone who actually gaffed about politics. And this tension becomes even more clear with the album that we're about to talk about. The question has slowly shifted from, does the 1975 have something meaningful to say, to should the 1975 be the people that are saying it? The creation of this album comes after a very transformative point in time for Maddie. It was after he came out of rehab and after they came out with Inquiry, such a open album, such a honest album. We had songs with very central themes of addiction, such as It's Not Living If It's Not With You, Surrounded by Heads and Bodies, I Always Wanna Die. These are songs that tackle heavier subjects. They talk about mental health as a whole and how detrimental it can be. And it talks about them not as these sort of like otherworldly concepts, but rather as very deeply personal experiences. And it was that recovery period from Inquiry that directly influenced the emotional direction that comes into Notes. Notes looks at how a person exists in the world today. That's why it's a bit more of a quieter, stranger, a little bit more fragmented album than the previous. It's not designed to be some like big political statement. It's a collection of observations from someone who is processing everything happening all at once. As most 1975 albums start, they begin with their title track, the 1975 by the 1975. But this one is none as like any we've heard before. As previously, they all have roughly the same lyrics, sound roughly the same, just a little bit tweaked to the general sound of the album. This one follows a speech by Greta Thunberg. Guys, if I said that wrong, that's so embarrassing, but I heard Google say it like 4 times. I just can't recreate that accent. If you don't know who she is at this point, she is a Swedish climate activist. She has been advocating for all sorts of climate crises and how to fix them for years upon years now, I think over a decade at this point. But the speech is adapted from her 2019 address to the World Economic Forum, where she addresses the urgency of climate change. She says, "We are now in the beginning of a climate and ecological crisis. It is now the time for civil disobedience. It is time to rebel."
Adults keep saying, we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act.
The choice of using the speech to open the album was very different to anything that they've ever done before. Some people praise the band for putting such a political piece in their song as the opening track of an album by a major band. And some people just call them performative. But regardless, the message is extremely clear. The 1975 believes that music and politics can no longer be separated. And in that, saying that your personal and political life cannot be separated. This track is 5 minutes long, and it's essentially her entire speech, just put over one of George's instrumentals. As on the previous album, we had Love It If We Made It, which directly calls out presidents and the world around us, as well as Give Yourself a Try, which directly calls out the mental health crisis that is happening and been happening in the US. The 1975, with Greta's speech, has directly moved from observing the world around us to actively participating in it. The band is choosing a side, essentially. And this decision reflects a broader cultural moment that is happening. By 2019, this climate activism had become a defining political issue for Gen Z and millennials, but mainly Gen Z. I mean, Greta herself is a very young activist. I mean, she's only a couple years older than me. There are millions of young people who at the time were joining these climate protests and demanding stronger action. And for a band like the 1975, whose main fan base is younger people such as Gen Z, climate change is an existential issue. It is something that we have known essentially our whole lives. And it represents our fear from the future and what we cannot change and the uncertainty behind that, which is where we get into the next song, the first actual song on the album, which is People. The song is a big switch. I think it kind of goes like all the way back to the 1975 roots, like back when they were really punk before they started actually releasing music. I mean, as he says in the lyrics, wake up, it's Monday morning, you only got 1,000 of them left. It's very distorted, it's very abrasive, it feels like an attack. And for a band that is built on vulnerability and pop music, essentially, the song is like a very sharp left turn, but it's very deliberate in the sense that the 1975 title song talks about the world being in crisis. People is a response to that song, saying that we need to wake up. The song is not at all subtle in what it says. Maddie has described Greta to be the most punk person he's ever met. It addresses the apathy that a lot of young people have from problems that we've inherited and did not create at all. While a lot of political music can sound like punk music, this is the band's way of saying that yes, even a major pop or alt pop band can make a statement. But it's always been kind of hard for the 1975 to make some sort of political statement because they're like a famous pop band. I mean, there are a million times where Maddie has been called a nepo baby, and he is just like someone who is so willing to talk about controversial topics as well as just his overall very like exaggerated public persona. It's fascinating to see someone who's so open about that, but it's also a little bit frustrating, I will say, because at the end of the day, this is a rich white man talking about the issues of the world. He's talking about it because he's the only person that people will listen to. He's willing to admit his contradictions. He has openly discussed the issues in his life. He's openly discussed the issues in the world. He's questioned his own motivations. He has questioned faith. But at the end of the day, this kind of self-awareness that you have does not excuse you from things in general. Should he be the person to be talking about these things? Arguably, no. I mean, he has not experienced a lot of the hardships that many young people in the millennial and Gen Z generations have, because they got rich and famous very quickly. He has still observed it all, I would say. As someone with a platform as big as the 1975 does, or Matty Healy does, I guess it's good in a way that he is talking about it, because they have the means to do so with a much larger megaphone than any of us do. And again, this is like a tension that's brought up throughout the entirety of the era. Some people say that he is like a little bit too introspective and always talking about himself, but it's like, what else are you gonna make music about if not yourself? He's aware of his ego, but that does not eliminate the criticism of having an ego. It's just like if a male manipulator says, yeah, I'm a manipulator. That doesn't negate the fact that you manipulate people. Not calling him a manipulator, just using it as an example. The album, though, was supposed to arrive much earlier, actually, than 2020. It was announced as the second half of the Music for Cars project, literally right after Abior came out, but it came delayed, and then the album was expanded on, and then it was delayed again, and then it was expanded on, and eventually it became this 22-track, almost 90-minute record. I think it's like 80 minutes. And the rollout took nearly a year because they kept on like pushing it off and expanding it. Between 2019 and 2020, they released a bunch of singles. They had the 1975, they had People, 2 singles that we just talked about. They had Frail State of Mind, the Me and You Together song, The Birthday Party, and If You're Too Shy, Let Me Know. All bangers, all different sounding songs, all from the 1975. The fact that all these songs sounded so different has always been the band's greatest strength, while also their greatest weakness. Some people call this sort of diversity a reflection of modern listening habits and how people like to sort of flick through channels. As far as the streaming era goes, there are a lot of people that will only listen to 1 or 2 songs from an album. Nobody, especially in 2020, was gonna sit through an 80-minute album. Your attention span is too fried. That's why they made an album where each song sounds different, so it almost sounds as if you're listening to a playlist instead, where you're hit with a punk song next to an electronic song next to an R&B song. Notes on a Conditional Form is genreless, emotionally indulgent, raw, reflective, and a vulnerable music journey. But some people just called it like an incohesive album. Some people found that rather than it being experimental, it just sounds unfinished. But enjoyers of the album would argue that it embraces the chaos. And this is a big debate that defines most of the reception of the album. The central question that Notes on a Conditional Form asks is, can art still matter amidst it all? What is the responsibility of an artist in a crisis? Should musicians be entertainers? Should they be the ones to break the news? Music does not exist separate from reality, whether that be climate change, political division, internet culture, mental health, isolation. These are all things that we all deal with. It is the environment that we all have to live with as listeners of this music. So why not make music that reflects that? It does not reflect it in a neat, packaged, perfect way. It reflects it as it is, which is chaotic. Enter May 22nd, 2020. We as listeners are finally introduced to the album Notes on a Conditional Form, but the world that it has been dropped into is completely different from the one that was imagined when it was written. When the band began writing the album, they talked a lot about political instability and climate change and all the stuff that I just mentioned previously. But by the time that it dropped, there was a very new issue and a very widespread issue, and that was COVID. A certain pandemic that occurred. Concerts were canceled, people were isolated, you were only left at home with your earbuds. What can you do but listen to music? And good for you, there's an 80-minute album waiting for you. But millions of these people, these listeners, had formed a new relationship with technology, spending absolutely unprecedented amounts of time online. And this coming right after Abior, an album that talks all about the harms of being isolated and online, is kind of crazy. Many of the themes that the 1975 had been talking about for years now felt much closer to reality than they ever should have been. These songs that had been written pre-pandemic gained new meaning. Songs like Frail State of Mind, where he says, "Go outside seems unlikely, sorry that I missed your call." These lyrics that describe isolation in a personal and emotional state now become reality. And it's become a part of a global experience. Suddenly, nobody's going outside and it seems extremely unlikely. and everybody's missing your call. While their previous album had questioned the modern world, Notes looks at what is actually happening in the modern world. The title of the album itself is significant. What is a conditional form? Conditional form suggests that it is something that exists under certain circumstances, something that is dependent on outside forces, such as a person being shaped by an environment. These notes on a conditional form would be points and notes taken by someone who lives in a very hyper-specific environment, such as the world that was 2019. The album does not present some sort of solution for us on how we should be living our life. Instead, it documents what it is like to live life as someone at that time. The way that the 1975 goes about being political throughout this album is very different from traditional protest music. It's not surrounding one ideology or one issue or one movement that they want to talk about. It captures more of the feeling of being physically overwhelmed by all of these issues at once, whether that be climate change, technology, identity, capitalism, mental health, loneliness, isolation. The constant feeling of receiving all of this information and not knowing what to do with it all, the overwhelmingness of it all, is what the album talks about. So it's less of like a political manifesto rather than it is just a portrait of a generation. The album's opening track is one of its most debated moments. For supporters of the band, they found it powerful, where the band used their platform to amplify one of the most influential climate change activists in the world. Some people asked if that is meaningful, or is it just like a famous band using political imagery as a part of their album rollout, though I feel as though the 1975 has shown time and time again that they really are about what they sing about, and it's not just for an aesthetic. But how much responsibility should an artist have? Do they have an obligation to talk about politics or the state of the world? How much awareness can a band bring without direct action? And how long does it take for speaking about an issue to become more of a performance and less of something that comes from the heart? Great question, Sanchi. You're gonna be saying to the camera, and I'm gonna be like, yeah, I know I'm asking great questions right now, but how are we gonna answer them? I don't know. I'm not Maddie Healy. But the 1975 seemed to be quite aware of these questions that were being brought up to them. Throughout their career, they have examined their relationship time and time again between authenticity and performance. We've talked about this in other videos, I think mainly in the I Like It When You Sleep one. This band has always been about contradiction, and it is central to Notes as an album. This album is full of concerns, but it is also about doubt for what can one do with all of these concerns. And it is in that sense where Notes on a Conditional Form is unlike anything that we have heard before from the 1975, especially in a musical sense. They are hardcore, they are ambient, they are garage, they are house, they are country inspired, they're shoegaze, they're synth pop, they're acoustic folk, they're gospel, they're R&B. These are all of the genres that make up this album. A lot, I know. And it is the ultimate expression of their creativity. As The Guardian has said themselves, it feels less like listening to an album and more like flicking through Spotify. Songs like Yeah, I Know, Having No Head, and Streaming are fully atmospheric, but some people just call it unfinished, which I don't think is true. I think without these songs, you would not really feel as immersed into the album as you could be. It constantly challenges you as a listener. There are so many times where you could just click off and say, I'm done with this, or just skip to the next song. And it can be an exhausting listen. But I think it's another one of those listens that's kind of like to weed out all the fake fans, and it's kind of like, hey, if you really like our music and what we do and what we stand for, you're gonna fuck with this album. And if you don't, that's technically okay too. You are not obligated to enjoy and fully sit through every single release of your favorite artist. But for the girls who get it, they get it. Even supporters of the album talk about its lack of traditional structure, though they say that it is intentional. Life itself is fragmented. Identity is fragmented. Therefore, the music should be as well. Why should an album that talks about the chaos and brokenness of the world be polished and organized? They have contradictions once again in this album, talking about hope and anxiety, confidence and insecurity, ambition and doubt, as well as performance and vulnerability. I think the thing that struck me the most as interesting when it comes to this album is the personality in it. And what I mean by that is like the personal experiences that Maddie speaks of. I think my favorite song being Jesus Christ 2005, God Bless America, featuring the one and only Phoebe Bridgers. It examines religion, sexuality, acceptance, and rather than approaching these in such a broad context, it focuses on individual experiences that the two have had, exploring a conflict between personal identity and societal expectations. Similarly, another good song would be Nothing Revealed, Everything Denied, where he questions fame and authenticity. One of the first lyrics of the song being I never fucked in a car, I was lying, referencing Love It If We Made It, when the first lyric is we're fucking in a car shooting heroin. While a funny line, it brings up the fact that like, hey, none of these lyrics have to mean anything. They don't have to be true, but in that same sense, is anything the 1975 has ever said true? If he will make up something for the sake of a lyric, who's to say that every lyric is not made up? Just something to think about. I don't know. By the end of 2020, this album had become one of the most divisive and talked about albums of the year. There were two completely different interpretations of it. Some people saw it as ambitious, while other people saw it as excessive. Even critics who originally disliked the album upon first listen reconsidered it. One reviewer admitting that their original criticism completely ignored the importance of George's production on the overall artistic context of the album. I don't think that this is an album that you can judge on pop standards because it is not a traditional pop album. It's not supposed to be an easy album. It's supposed to be what it feels like to live in 2020, which was anything but easy. But what is the 1975 without a good pop song, you know? I think amidst of all of the chaos in these 22 songs, there are a couple bangers, some more palatable songs, and one of those is If You're Too Shy, Let Me Know. Released as the last single before the album's release, I think it's the song that really shot this album back into the mainstream. The 1975 can be political, but they can still make a good pop song. And lyrically, it still sticks with the themes of notes, that being the intimacy that comes with the digital age, as well as the relationship that people have with screens and distance, especially now more than ever. With the lyric, like, I see her online all the time. Relationships continue to persist through technological challenges, through people being unable to be with each other. And it connects all the way back to Abbey Oregon, an album that talks all about internet and connection and personal behavior. Notes goes back and asks, what if all of those changes became the new normal, which they ended up doing. Technology is not something that is outside of a human relationship. It is part of how we exist within current relationships now. Now, those singles were good, but I think my favorite song might be Birthday Party. Birthday Party or Guys, which we will get into, but Birthday Party first. I think it's one of the most important songs because it kind of takes you into a third person perspective of the band, if that makes sense. It's an acoustic song about a birthday party, you know, but it's Maddie talking about himself and fame, following himself as his identity has changed and looking at all of these new reflections of who he's become. After years and years of excess of drugs and partying and nightlife and fame and being this like rock star, the birthday party is Maddie after all of that. After becoming the person that people expected him to be. The song is just about being disconnected. Jesus Christ, 2005. God freaking bless America. What a song. It makes me cry. I've heard this song live one time in my whole life. I don't think I'll ever be able to handle it again. It shows more of how the band discusses political topics. They take it in a very personal writing setting. As we said before, it talks about religion and sexuality and how the two intertwine. And it shows how even when Maddie is talking about these big life experiences and political contentions, he still talks about it from such a personal perspective. Because all of these issues are important to us because they affect us individually and they affect our hearts. And so he is singing from it, from his heart. My favorite song, as we just mentioned, is Guys, which is the closer of the album. I always love a closer, guys. But it is also the conclusion of the Music for Cars era. The song is a love song, but it's not a love song to a partner. It's a love song to his friends, to the guys in the band. As he says in the lyrics, the moment that you took my hand is the best thing that ever happened. That is so cute. I could cry. That song genuinely makes me want to cry. But the song is extremely significant. It reframes the entirety of the 1975 story all over again. At the end of the day, they're just guys. They're just 4 friends who have been friends. And the success is secondary. And how beautiful is that? Oh my god, I could die. And it's so sweet because like they're just guys. Like wow. And this album would have been great to perform live if it were not for the pandemic, unfortunately. Due to the big 19, live music kind of came to a halt, and live music has always been a really big thing for the band. So this kind of sucked like super mega big time. Ironically enough, the album that was all about isolation and disconnection came at a point where everyone was isolated and disconnected from the world. But the pandemic also changed the way that people interact with music. People were not experiencing music mainly through a live setting. They were experiencing it through their headphones and their earbuds. Bands were constantly forming new online identities and new communities to meet each other through. The digital world that the 1975 spent this whole album theorizing about and analyzing became so much more central to both their fan base and their music as a whole. It was also during this time where the public perception about Maddie started to shift a little bit. To fans, he is an extremely honest person. He is a person that has talked about anything and everything that has ever happened in his life. To outsiders, this sort of self-analysis of Maddie Healy, the person, has become exhausting. His desire to comment on everything that is happening in the world and culture often creates debates between the fan base and non-fans of if there can be any meaningful criticism given through his music. But what does it all mean in the context of the album? Looking back on it now, it is one of the clearest examples of the 1975 central philosophy, which is that the world is messy and we are messy, and therefore music should be messy as well. This album was not something that was meant to be universally loved or hated. It was not something that was meant to be perfect. It is something that is meant to be human. It captures a very specific moment in history, the pre-pandemic / pandemic of it all, of a world that deals with climate crises and online crises, where this generation has seen institutions fail over and over again, and we are searching for meaning amidst the uncertainty. It is not just an album that was released in 2020, it is the album that sounds the most 2020 without actually having experienced it. And with the end of Notes on a Conditional Form, we are met with the end of Music for Cars. The Music for Cars era began asking the question, does the center hold? Meaning, does the core of who the 1975 are hold true to their character? And to that I'll say, yes, it does. The relationships, the friendships, the creativity that this band was built on still provides meaning. It still provides the central theme of the album on top of all of the political commentary that it has to say. The end of the album returns to its simplest beginnings, which is just 4 guys in a band. Notes on a Conditional Form is not a 1975 album that was trying to explain what the world would be. It's just them admitting that they are as confused as we are, and that is okay, and you can still make art. And I think that's why a lot of people ended up connecting with it. The 1975, as of 2021-ish, 2022-ish, they've been making music for almost a decade now as the 1975. They have been reinventing themselves, experimenting, and have been through many controversies. So it's time for like a little bit of a turning point. Not that kind of turning point. By the beginning of the 2020s, they were quite the divisive band. Their first 3 albums encapsulated this sort of internet, Tumblr, indie vibe that they had going on. And then their 4th album, Notes, kind of takes like a little bit of a different turn. Notes is a massive album, 22 tracks to be exact. It is ambient, it is hardcore, it is electronic, it is acoustic, it's everything in between and more. That's kind of the problem with it. While some people found this to be a beautiful album, me included, some people felt like they were just doing too much. But the thing with the 1975 is, what do you do when you've done it all? Good for them. They had some time to think about it, because what happened in 2020? The big C. C standing for canceled tour, of course, not the other thing. Like many artists, they had a tour planned for 2020, a certain pandemic hit, and now they no longer had a tour. The 1975, as we know, is a band that loves to tour. They find it super important to their career. So what the heck are they gonna do now? For a band that had been constantly in motion for as long as they were, this was a very unfamiliar position for them. For the first time in years, there was no next step forward. There was no album cycle. There was no arena to perform in. There was no expectation to really do anything. It was during this period where Matty Healy began to tease music under the name Drive Like I Do, which, if you guys may or may not remember, was one of the former band names of the 1975. Now, in him doing this, it created a lot of speculation amongst fans that maybe the band will come back to an earlier sound, the very sort of raw and guitar driven sound that they used to have before all of the electronica of it all. And while Matty did confirm that yes, the 1975 is working on their fifth studio album, nobody knew when that would come. And it was one of the first really major times in the 1975 career where there was an air of uncertainty in what was next. The idea to return back to the name Drive Like I Do is really interesting to me because throughout their entire career, the 1975 is kind of obsessed with themselves and their own history. I mean, like, their albums constantly look back while moving forward in time. Their self-titled debut album looks at nostalgia as a main concept of it. I Like It When You Sleep expands on that world, turning it neon colored, as we have talked about. You know, Inquiry looks at loneliness and communication. Notes is like a diary if it were songs. But after Notes, we need to hear something different. And they decided, let's go smaller. In fact, let's just chop an album in half. Instead of trying to capture the whole freaking world as they have in previous albums, they decided to capture a moment in time in discussing the creation of the album. Now, this is via Wikipedia, so I don't know how true this is because I can't find the original source, but in describing this album, he said, "Every record I've ever made, I've convinced myself that I had to prove so much. So it had to be about everything that had ever happened, everything that's happening now, and everything that could happen. But on this record, I said, instead of a magnum opus, what about more like a Polaroid? This album is not a manifesto. It is not some statement. It's just a moment in time." On Valentine's Day of 2022, the 1975 deactivated their main social accounts. Now, we've seen this happen before, and we just know it means that a new era is coming. Changed up the fonts a little bit, changed up their profile pictures a little bit, came back to something new. But this time, fans were receiving postcards again. The title of the album, Being Funny in a Foreign Language. The track list, this time only 11 songs. Very different from their previous albums, which have been, like 30 songs, 20 songs. This one is 11, now only 10 because Human 2 has been taken off streaming. This is their shortest album ever, with only 10 songs. The 1975, Happiness, Looking for Somebody to Love, Part of the Band, Oh Caroline, I'm in Love with You, All I Need to Hear, Wintering, Human 2, The Lost Track, About You, and When We Are Together. This album, while the shortest in the entirety of the band's career, is extremely intentional. They are not proving how many ideas or concepts they can put into one project. They're focusing on what they've always been doing and what they do best, which is pop songs, good songwriting, and humor, and romance, I guess. Yeah, the recording of this album happened in 2021, or began in 2021 while they worked with BJ Burton, who worked with Bon Iver on 22. But halfway through working on this album, their creative direction shifted a little bit as they began to work with Jack Antonoff, who is known for creating this very warm, nostalgic feeling to his music as he works with the band Bleachers. He is the band Bleachers. He's also worked with artists such as Lana Del Rey, Lorde. I don't know if you guys have seen my Taylor and Maddie video, but this time was a tiny bit turbulent in 2021 as Jack was working with both Taylor and Maddie on separate projects. For Maddie, Jack Antonoff is exactly what the band needed to finish this album. He is someone who can really clarify a sound. And this is where I get into saying that this album is the most experimental that they've done, in the sense that all of their previous music has relied heavily on electronic and digitized production. I don't want to say computer generated, but it's kind of like everything is made on the computer, using beats on the computer, using instrumentals on the computer. Whereas for this album, they focused a lot more on live instrumentation, using real performances, whether that be strings or saxophone or the guitar, bass or drums, piano, things like that. And they focused a lot more on the chemistry between the band members as if they were making a live album without being on stage. As we've loved to do with these videos, switching about the question that each album brings, the album being funny in a foreign language is not what can the 1975 be next, rather than it is what has the 1975 always been. The 1975 come back and better than ever, their first single, Part of the Band, on July 7th of 2022. For many people, this is an interesting comeback. After hearing these great pop singles like The Sound and Love It If We Made It and If You're Too Shy, this single is very acoustic, it's very orchestral, it's very dense lyrically. It's not a comeback single in the way that most other bands would go about it. This song talks a lot about self-awareness, talks about aging, it talks a little bit about being cynical. This album tackles a lot of topics that have been alluded to in different albums that they've made but have not directly discussed. They're a very different version of themselves now. As the band returned in 2022, essentially 3-4 years after making their previous album, the cultural landscape has shifted quite a lot since then. The world has changed, the band has changed, and Maddie's relationship with fame has once again changed. For years upon years, as we've been talking out through the series, the 1975 has built their identity around contradiction. The band would write pop songs about pop culture. They would create moments of nostalgia while criticizing that very nostalgia. They were sincere and ironic at the same time throughout all of their music. And this tension has always been a great strength to them. But we're 5 albums in now, and it's getting exhausting. It's getting boring. It's getting overdone. This album peels back all the layers and finds what's real under all of that. As the 1975 has continued their tradition of the first track of each of their albums being the 1975 by the 1975, last album notes they did something very different where it is not the same song as it's always been. It's not the same lyrics as it's always been. It's a speech. This album, they decided, well, since we've already deviated off course, might as well take a full left turn, and they just made a whole new song. There is no more Go Down Soft Sound, Midnight Car Lights. Instead, we have Feeling Apathetic After Scrolling Through Hell. I think I've got a boner, but I can't really tell. The lyrics in and of itself kind of capture the central ideas of the album. The internet is making people aware of suffering, but awareness doesn't create action. It creates numbness. Instead, people scroll, they see tragedy, they see fights, they see internet arguments, and it's all just background noise. Another memorable lyric is making an aesthetic after not doing well, mining all the bits of you think you could sell. I think this lyric is also a bit of a mission statement for the entirety of the album. 1975 as a band has always been quite fascinated when it comes to the construct of identities in creating aesthetics out of, I guess in this case, sadness and suffering, and in a way how the band themselves have done this. I think my favorite lyric out of this whole song, I'm sorry if you're living and you're 17. This being my favorite lyric because when the album came out, I was in fact living in 17, and it was truly life-changing for me. It's really all I have to say about that lyric. The next incredible single, finally being something with a little bit more pep, we have Happiness. After all the anxiety that the first track brings to us, the 1975, how it talks about how overwhelming modern life is, Happiness responds with the only possible answer, which is you gotta dance through it. The song goes back to their sort of like 80s pop vibe that they have going on with like a little bit of funk, a little bit of sax in it. I love dancing to it. Like, I'm not even gonna lie, it's a fun song, it's a good song. Can vividly remember I would listen to it while walking to school, and I would have a bit more of a pep in my step, if I'm gonna be honest. The song itself is about a search for happiness. It explores the feelings of finally finding something that is meaningful to you. The contrast between the first 2 songs is extremely intentional. The world is quite overwhelming, but joy is worth pursuing, which I think answers a question that we asked in our previous video, where we said, what is the point of entertaining at a time like this, at a time of such civil unrest. And I think that this album itself is an answer to that question, saying that like, you gotta dance through it all. You gotta find happiness. You gotta find something worth living for. Part of that leads into our next song, which is Looking for Somebody to Love. At first glance, this song is just another one of those 80s inspired songs that 1975 loves. It has synth, it has rhythm, it has choruses. It's incredible. I mean, the song talks about loneliness, it talks about entitlement, it talks about wanting to be noticed and wanting to be loved. To me, it kind of reminds me of like Pumped Up Kicks in the ways that like it sounds like it's not a super meaningful song unless you listen to the lyrics, you know what I mean? The song just continues on with these running themes that we've seen through all of their music so far, which is how people can appear so normal while dealing with so much. And the next song, Part of the Band, which was the first single, is kind of a return to Matty Healy and his character and all that. The 4th track on the song, Part of the Band, reveals exactly what this album is meant to be, or what it wants to be. I'll say it was a very risky choice for a lead single. Instead of something fun that would get them in the media or get them trending, this is a very folk-inspired song. Like I said earlier, it was orchestral, very self-criticizing song as well. In this song, it's almost a conversation with the audience where he talks about his reputation and his mistakes, the contradictions that his lyrics uphold, the privilege that he has, as long as well his desire to be understood through his music. He puts himself in the position of the person making these observations as well as the person who is being criticized of what they are doing. I think that lyrically, it is some of the most uncomfortable writing he's ever created. And I think that that is intentional. It's not asking for us as listeners to agree with everything that he's done. It is asking us to examine his identity for performance and compare that to the identity that we don't know, because we don't know him like that. And I feel like part of this connects directly to the title of the album being funny in a foreign language. People are constantly performing, they're constantly having to translate themselves to different audiences and constantly trying to be understood. And the best way to be understood is through humor. So what Part of the Band asks is, am I, Matty Healy, a sincere person, or am I performing sincerity? Which the answer to that is probably both, honestly. It's really easy to amp things up for the microphone or the camera, but it's also really easy to be a super sincere person. After the first 4 tracks of the album, the 1975 has established what is meant to be the emotional landscape of this album, about wanting connection and finding joy and questioning yourself. The band has spent all of these years expanding outwards and asking questions to the world. And now it's time to kind of take a look in the mirror, take a look inside, and ask questions about yourself. And again, the first half of the album shows quite the balance that they have. They have pop songs, they have social commentary, they have jokes, they have confessions, they have it all. Aside from all that though, the 1975 has always been a band that is about love. They're obsessed with it, really. Not romantic love, as we've seen from some of their songs. Their last song before this album being Guys. Love is complicated, it's embarrassing. It's a desperate and beautiful experience of wanting someone, of wanting to be someone's. I don't know if that was grammatically correct. Throughout their career, some of their biggest songs have been love songs. Robbers, Somebody Else, Change of Heart, It's Not Living, all being about love, but about loving different things. Love can be obsessive, it can be heartbreaking. You could be in love with change. You could be in love with an addiction. And being funny in a foreign language goes back to this topic. But now, because it's been a couple of years, they can approach it with a bit more maturity. This song is less fantastical as it is accepting of what love is really like, which is messy and confusing and imperfect. And we are introduced to the song Oh Caroline. Musically, I think if the song didn't sound as polished as it does, it would fit right in with other 80s pop ballads. A lot of people have compared a lot of their work to soft rock and new wave songs from that era and how similarly they have shaped 1975 songs. But lyrically, it is so much more than what its bright production suggests that it is. The song centers around a woman, Caroline. At first listen, it sounds like a very simple confession, but underneath all of that is fear of not expressing all of your love and being terrified to lose it all. It's another one of those songs where musically it sounds like everything is perfect, but lyrically everything's falling apart, which is, I think, the main contradiction of this album, how songs can make you dance while revealing the pain underneath the lyrics. Caroline herself has become a mystery to a lot of fans because, hey, we don't know any Carolines within the 1975 verse. I think the uncertainty of who she is quite intentional. Caroline could be anybody, and I think that's the best way for audiences to really connect with the song even more. The next song being I'm in Love with You. It has become one of the biggest songs on the album since then. It's fascinating with how simple it is, especially lyrically. I mean, the lyrics are just I'm in love with you. There's no metaphor. There is no underlying meaning. For an album that is so heavy with deeper meaning, this is a song that doesn't hide behind irony. And I think that is one of the biggest changes in the entirety of this album. As before, they have approached emotions through a more indirect lens. This album is a lot more straightforward in its lyricism, removing the distance from it all. This is a song that's music matches the emotional openness of it. The song is bright and energetic, as are the lyrics. It's after these two songs, though, where there is a sudden shift into vulnerability. The first half of this album does a lot to find confidence as the singer. These songs move between wanting to be loved and fearing rejection, and wanting to be understood but fearing judgment. And all this tension comes to a head at possibly the most stripped back moment of the album, which is All I Need to Hear, the 7th track and the 4th single. Compared to the massive pop production of the previous songs that we've heard, this song feels empty, feels a little bit out of place. It is just piano, guitar, and vocals. And the simplicity is the point. It is not a grand gesture of anything. It's about reassurance and just honesty. The narrator, singer of the song, does not need a perfect relationship. They just want to know that what they're feeling is mutual and real. And sometimes all you need to hear is I love you. This song is also very representative of the recording progress of this album. Like we talked before, it's a very raw recording progress. This song sounds like it was recorded in the living room. And after all the emotional seriousness of All I Need to Hear, we have another change in direction with the 8th track, Wintering. I think it's the most charming track. I put it on my story every winter on December 23rd. It's about coming home for Christmas. You know, it's about family. It's about old relationships. It's about hometowns. A little bit about chaos. It's not like a sentimental song or like a super Christmassy song. It's awkward. It's funny. Emotional-ish song. It's kind of fun. The lyrics just talk about like different family members and their quirks, how everybody just has like their own personality, own issues, their own strangeness to them, and that's what makes it like such a meaningful song. It's also like very folky. Like I could see Noah Kahan covering it. It just like gives that vibe. It's like nostalgic but not like sentimental nostalgic. It's just kind of like, oh my god, this feels like 2010s. And I think that that's another difference between this album and the rest of the 1975's music. This is not like an album that feels so distinctly 2022. This is an album that I constantly come back to because it feels so timeless and it's so short and I can loop it over and over again on my drive. Whereas I feel like the other albums just transport me back to a moment in time. And this is different in the album too, because this is an album that explores connection rather than isolation, even if that connection is imperfect. As the first half or first third-ish of the album really talks about like how do we survive in this world, the answer to that is through people, through love, family, and connection. We really just need each other to be happy. And this album does not pretend that a relationship will solve everything. In fact, many of these songs acknowledge the exact opposite of that. Love is desperate, love is uncertain, love is complicated, love is embarrassing, but it's something that's worth pursuing. And I think that's why this album feels so different than the previous two albums that we've discussed and even beyond that. Those albums looked outward while this one looks inward and asks, who are we when everything else disappears? We are just people that want to be loved. The final act of this album, the last 3 songs, look at regret and insecurity and forgiveness and kind of being okay with love changing. The end of the album, again, is not some sort of grand conclusion. There's no question that's dying to be answered, but the end of this album is acceptance, accepting the love in your life, accepting your life for what it is. We hear the Lost song on the album, which is Human 2, a song that you may or may not have heard. It's another slow song. It's very fragile. It's a confession of sorts. Maddie took it off streaming because he felt like it didn't fit the album, but like, don't piss me off. Throughout most of their career, Maddie has sung about his flaws. He sings about insecurity, arrogance, vulnerability, addiction. We've talked about all these things before. Human 2 strips away all the performance of it all. It is another acoustic song. It's an admission of sorts, saying that I make mistakes. I am an imperfect person, but I'm human. Which, yeah, I guess. I mean, like, frankly, this is a song that I haven't heard in a year or so, maybe. Ever since it got taken off streaming. Even before then, I didn't really listen to it. But it's just a song about showing your imperfections. And that doesn't make you any more or less of a human. It just makes you human along with everyone else. The 10th track, About You, is possibly the most popular song on their album. It's become one of the more defining tracks. Although it was not an initial single pre-album rollout, it has gained quite a bit of attention since its release. I like the song, can't exactly listen to it all the time. To me, it feels a lot like a continuation of Robbers, maybe like a more grown-up version of Robbers. They both have very similar themes of this sort of dramatic love story and nostalgia and being unable to forget someone and wondering if they remember you in the same light that you remember them, which the answer is probably not. I think the reason that people like this song so much is because of the seemingly unknown singer on it, the feature being Carly Holt, the female vocalist of the song. Carly Holt, who is Adam Han, the guitarist's wife. She sings the bridge to the song, and it changes kind of what the entire song feels like, what it means to people. The contrast between Maddie's voice and Carly's voice shows like two people looking back on the same relationship from two entirely different places and perspectives, not like reaching out for each other, not two people who are together, not two people who are apart, just two people reminiscing on a relationship, I guess. The song itself feels like a blurry memory. It feels like a fuzzy Polaroid photo card. I think a lot of fans connected to the song so strongly because it doesn't describe a specific moment in time, rather than it describes the whole feeling of a relationship, remembering something that you can never go back to or go back in time to. And the album ends with When We Are Together. I really like this song a lot. I think hearing it live, a very emotional feeling. It is, as of right now, their final, most recent song. They have not made music since this album, aside from their 2 live albums, which we will get into in a minute. After an album that is so poppy and commentative of culture and somewhat acoustic, this album ends on something very simple, very quiet. A conversation of sorts. Lyrically, it talks about the same themes that we've been talking about: conversations, habits, imperfections. I know we've been talking about the same thing forever and ever, but this album is just such a big maturity step up compared to their recent work. It feels like they are actually like older listening back on it. Love does not fix everything. Love does not promise a perfect ending. Love just is, and so you should appreciate it while you have it. There's like a type of sadness that's underneath this song, that relationships are not permanent. And they're not exactly meant to be. But that doesn't mean that a relationship or a connection of any sort is meaningless. If it makes you feel something, even if it's temporary, is something, and it matters. This album is something that comes extremely full circle when it comes to the 1975's entire discography, with the final moments of When We Are Together transitioning back into the opening track of the 1975. This is like the most like loopable, loopy album ever. The album starts talking about uncertainty and a fear of falling apart, and it ends with accepting that uncertainty and finding meaning through relationships that may or may not fall apart. In the context of their entire career, it represents a big turning point for the band in the sense that it is no longer trying to say something that is super political or culturally defining. It's 10 tracks long, like 30-ish 35 minutes. There's no interludes, there's no instrumental songs. It's very straightforward. Upon critical acclaim, great album. It also did really well commercially. if you care about that. I think for years, this has been a band that has loved to talk about big ideas, technology, humanity, identity. This has always been a band that has loved to talk about changing the world. And this album shifts all of that, talking about how do we change each other. Past this album, they have made 2 live albums as they've gone on 2 tours, the 1975 at their very best and the 1975 still at their very best. The sets for the shows were incredible. Oh my god. The stage is like a house, you know, it's like a living room, bedroom, very cutesy, very modern. In a way, 1975 shows have become home to many fans. I mean, I know when I was at the show, I spoke to so many people who had said that they have been going to shows since like the band started, which to me was crazy because I was like 7 when that happened. It's always so incredible and so rewarding to talk to the veterans of shows who can speak on all of their experiences, speak on all the knowledge, you know, all the memories that they have had with this band. I think that this is an incredible band that has truly shaped a generation of people. They've shaped a way of music. They've shaped the culture. In many ways, I feel like this era is one of the most important in the band's career. Last year at the one and only festival that they played, they very explicitly said, no, the 1975 is not leaving. We're coming back. We have new music eventually. This album has never truly felt like a goodbye, but I feel like if it were to be, this would be a perfect place to end off. I think they've said so much throughout their career. No idea what they're gonna say next. I'm sure it's gonna be incredible though. The 1975 has been at their very best. I think they will only continue to get better. The legacy that this album has is quite different than their other albums. I think that this, while one of their more popular albums, I would not say it's an album that a lot of people would first think of when they think of the 1975. They would probably think of Sleep or Inquiry or probably Self-Titled. If you were to ask a 1975 fan what their opinion of this album is, I think most people would put it in the top 2. Lyrically, I think it's some of their best work. I think it's a very concise album. I think that's a good thing. Instrumentally, I think it's my favorite. I know I've said that I love Notes and I love Notes to death, but if I'm talking about like from a critical perspective, this one is just, I'm a sucker for live stuff. I love listening to both their live albums. I love listening to actually all their live albums, but especially their at their best and still at their best ones. Being Funny in a Foreign Language was a reset to their music, so I can only imagine that they're going to get even better with whatever they have next. I'm gonna just cut it right here. This has been such a fun adventure. I love talking about 1975, but I feel like I've been rambling for far too long about this band. So thank you guys again for sticking with me for the 2 weeks that I've been talking about this album. Thank you guys again so much for sticking with me. I've really appreciated going on this journey with you guys. I'm also really excited to talk about new things. I have some fun interviews coming up for next month and honestly the rest of the year. So please, 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 please stick around. And thank you guys again so much. Bye.